At 14, my dad did wrong to me twice. He tossed me out into a snowstorm, all for my sister's lies. I almost died. My mom got justice. Imagine this. 14 years old, slammed out into a raging Wisconsin blizzard, barefoot and coatless, left to die. Not by a stranger, but by my own father. And why? Because my sister, Hannah, spun a web of lies so venomous, it almost cost me everything. That night, the sound of that door slamming shut echoed, not just through the whipping snow, but deep in my very soul, a final, shattering crack that would redefine my entire life. It was December in Wisconsin, and darkness consumed the day by 5:30. Our kitchen, usually a lively, comforting space, felt eerily quiet as I hunched over my math homework, the calculations blurring as snow piled higher outside. The weather service had screamed warnings all day, a frantic chorus against the approaching storm's deceptive silence. But Hannah, my 17-year-old sister, a master manipulator, had decided she needed to go to the mall with her friends. Dad, for once, stood firm. Absolutely not, he'd said. The roads were already a dangerous canvas of ice and white, visibility dropping with every breath. The storm was just getting worse. Hannah's face shifted through a quick series of emotions. Astonishment at being told no, a flash of pure wrath, then a cold, disturbing flicker of calculation. She stomped upstairs, the slam of her bedroom door rattling the cheap frames in the hallway. Me. I was just grateful to be invisible for a change, a phantom presence amidst the brewing family drama. But here's the thing. You never truly understand the dark currents beneath the surface until the illusion of peace shatters. What happened next replays in my mind like a never-ending loop, a cycle of terror I can't escape. Hannah appeared 25 minutes later at the bottom of the stairs. Her makeup was smudged. Her shirt was ripped, just so at the neck, soaked in sobbing. But these weren't the furious, resentful tears from before. This was a deliberate, dramatic display, punctuated by gasping hyperventilation. Dad dropped his newspaper, the sudden rustle breaking the quiet, his face drained of color. The tale she spun was intricate, a tapestry of deception woven with vivid, devastating details. She accused me of following her upstairs, attacking her for being the favorite, pushing her against the wall, ripping her clothes, and venomously declaring, "I wish she'd never been born!" Each charge, delivered between agonizingly believable cries, was more absurd than the last. She claimed I'd been plagued by envy for years, had threatened her before, and she'd been too scared to speak up. It was a textbook example of pathological manipulation. These people, they fabricate sophisticated falsehoods, not just spontaneously, but with premeditation, playing on emotional weaknesses to get what they want, often with no regard for the consequences. They know how to weaponize apparent victimhood. My father slowly rose, his gaze hardening into something I'd never seen directed at me. Cold, hard rage. My voice was faint with terror as I pleaded with him. I pointed to my math homework, scattered on the table, the fresh pencil lines, the half-solved problems. Indisputable proof I'd been right there the entire time. He didn't listen. Maybe he was already too angry, too engrossed in Hannah's convincing performance to hear logic. Or maybe her act was just that compelling. She'd always been theatrical, capable of eliciting tears on command, but I never thought she'd use those abilities against me. He grabbed my arm, jerking me from the chair so aggressively my water glass shattered on the tile floor. Its dreadful punctuation accompanied Hannah's resumed, dramatic cries. His accusations grew louder, more aggressive. How dare I harm my sister? What kind of person was I becoming? He'd raised me better than this. This was how I repaid him. His grip on my arm tightened, eliciting a cry of pain from me, which only fueled his fury. He assumed I was just copying Hannah's drama, putting on a show. My mother, bless her sensible heart, was 4 states away, caring for her sister after surgery. Hannah had definitely factored that into her timing. Mom would have questioned, scrutinized, researched. Dad simply reacted. The first slap landed with a violent power that stole my breath. It startled me into a silence deeper than any cry. My face burned with searing, furious heat. I tasted the metallic tang of blood where my teeth had sliced the inside of my mouth. He had never been a violent man. I'd never even received a spanking. But something in Hannah's narrative triggered a wrath in him I'd never known existed. The second blow sent me reeling backward, my hips smashing hard onto the kitchen counter. Hannah's tears had ended. Through the spinning cloud of pain in my eyes, I saw her, standing in the doorway, her face interested, devoid of fear or astonishment. Just satisfaction, the expression of someone whose perfectly planned strategy was playing out exactly as expected. That look, that icy, smug sparkle in her eyes, told me everything about how premeditated this treachery was. This instant, exaggerated reaction from my father, prompted by Hannah's story, was confirmation bias combined with a deep emotional trigger. He had inherent trust in Hannah's victimization, and her performance reinforced that, overriding any critical evaluation or questioning of facts. In such a heightened emotional state, people are readily blinded to contradicting evidence, especially if it challenges their immediate emotional response. Dad hauled me to the front door. Despite my urgent screams, my hoarse assurances of innocence, the storm outside had worsened. The wind shrieked. Snow piled against the porch railing. He pushed me out into the bitter cold, barefoot and gloveless, wearing only the thin jacket I'd worn to school. The door banged shut behind me, and I heard a horrible thud as the deadbolts fell into place. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The wind tore at my meager clothing, and the snow quickly soaked through my feet. I hammered on the door, yelling until my throat was raw, but no one answered. Hannah stood at the entrance, arms folded, watching me freeze. She grinned. Then she turned away. I had no option but to move. Standing still meant succumbing to the cold. Even at 14, I understood the terrifying seriousness of my situation. My dearest friend, Sophie, lived 5 streets away. On a normal day, it was a quick walk. But in this blizzard, it felt like an impossible polar adventure. The snow had blurred distinctions between yard and street, turning the area into a hazardous, homogeneous white expanse. Visibility was barely 10 feet. The streetlights were useless halos in the swirling pandemonium. Walking was agonizing. Snow drifts seized my feet and I fell twice. My hands sank into drifts that reached nearly to my waist. My fingers were already numb, my face burning from frostbite. The wind became an unseen, brutal force, pushing, dragging, bewildering, unrelenting. My feet were phantom limbs. My lungs ached from breathing the cold air. Every house I passed was a beacon of warmth, shining through the swirling snow. I saw families in their kitchens, children watching TV in cozy living rooms, regular Saturday night activities unfolding while I battled for my life. Shame, a frigid companion, kept me from knocking, from pleading for rescue. How could I explain this? What words would make sense if your father threw you out? Sophie's house loomed through the snow like a mirage, bringing a surge of desperate hope. My frozen intellect had acted on sheer raw instinct. The porch light was lit, a gorgeous golden beacon. I staggered up their driveway, tripped twice on the stairs, and crashed against the front door. My fists were too numb to bang, so I kicked the wood, praying the storm's fury wouldn't drown out the weak thumps. Then the door opened. Sophie's mother, Mrs. Collins, gasped. Mrs. Collins, a woman I'd known since 2nd grade, pulled me inside without a word. Her warm hands cradled my icy face as she called for her husband. They covered me in blankets, sat me by their roaring fireplace, and gave me hot cocoa, which I couldn't even grasp because my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Sophie emerged in her pajamas, her eyes wide with shock. The Collins family, bless them, didn't press for explanations right away. Mrs. Collins carefully checked my face, her expression tightening into a hard knot when she saw the bruises already appearing on my cheek and jaw. Mr. Collins, a quiet man, went upstairs and returned with dry clothes, thick socks, and a huge sweater. They just let me sit there and defrost, the shaking lasting for what felt like hours as my body fought to regain its warmth. But that was merely the beginning of the horror. Eventually, the words began to flow, first in pieces, then in a raw, uncontrollable torrent as the full narrative poured out. Hannah's falsehoods, Dad's terrifying reaction, the violent expulsion into the snow. Mrs. Collins's face alternated between shock, fear, and a furious, protective rage. Mr. Collins became intensely silent, a silence that felt heavier and more menacing than any scream. They tried to contact my house. No response. They tried 4 more times over the next hour. The same chilling outcome. Dad was either purposefully ignoring the phone or had just turned off the ringer, a practice he sometimes indulged in when he needed silence. Mrs. Collins left a message on the answering machine, her voice carefully controlled as she explained I was safe with them. She didn't mention the horrible state I'd arrived in, but her tone was unmistakably chilly. Sophie and I had been inseparable since 2nd grade. Her parents knew my family well. Mrs. Collins had always liked and respected my mother's work as a nurse. She'd been cordial, if rather chilly, to my father, and now, with chilling clarity, I understood why. She'd most certainly noticed something, a small warning sign of the aggression he'd kept hidden until that night. Sleep was impossible. I lay in Sophie's guest room, safe and cozy, yet my mind kept replaying the evening's events. Hannah's calculating face bothered me the most. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was carefully planned, arranged, precisely timed for Mom's absence. But why? What had I done to deserve such venom from my own sister? The answer came with the morning light, shining through the curtains like a sharp revelation. Hannah had wanted to go to the mall. Dad said no. She needed to shift his attention, to create a situation so severe that her initial requests would be forgotten. I had been convenient collateral, a sacrifice she was willing to make to divert his focus, a pawn in her devious game. The knowledge made my stomach churn with a sharp, metallic flavor. My mother arrived at the Collinses' house at 8 a.m. on Sunday. The blizzard had finally passed, leaving 3 feet of new snow and roads that were barely half cleared. Mom must have driven through treacherous conditions to come home early, putting her sister's recuperation on hold in the face of this unexpected, desperate need. Mrs. Collins had finally reached her late the night before and carefully explained the situation. Mom's expression when she saw me was dreadful, a mask of sadness and rising wrath. Mrs. Collins had painstakingly photographed my injuries with her digital camera, preserving the evidence before it faded. The photos showed a definite handprint on my cheek, another bruise on my jaw, and finger-shaped markings on my upper arm from Dad grabbing me. My mother examined each shot, her face darkening with every click. She grabbed me tightly as if I might break. Her hands trembled as she caressed my face, studying the bruises, absorbing the horrible deed perpetrated against her daughter. I had never seen my mother cry before. She was always pragmatic, stoic, dealing with situations with the same calm efficiency she used in the hospital. But tears streamed down her cheeks as she listened to my narrative of the previous night. Something fundamental, irreversible, shifted behind her eyes. This was a watershed event in our family dynamic, a tipping point. The old equilibrium, however dysfunctional, could no longer hold. My mother, who had before served as a facilitator through her absence or even passive acceptance, now became the principal driver of change, propelled by a keen understanding of the terrible betrayal and danger. Her reaction showed the psychological power needed to face abuse and set firm limits. The journey home was quiet. Mom's hands gripped the steering wheel so firmly her knuckles were white, yet her expression remained oddly serene. It was the look she used when dealing with tough patients, a mask of controlled wrath. I watched her profile and felt something unexpected. Hope. Maybe things wouldn't be okay. They would never be the same again, but they would certainly be different. When we stepped inside, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the Sunday paper, just like any other morning. He looked up, his expression transforming from astonishment to remorse when his gaze landed on me. The bruises, bright purple and yellow, told their own compelling narrative. He opened his lips to speak, but Mom raised her hand, a quiet, uncompromising demand. When she spoke, her voice was calm yet powerful like a tidal wave. Don't talk. Just listen. Hannah came into the doorway, still in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep. She froze, calculations flashing across her face as she tried to assess the situation. Mom turned to look at her, and whatever my sister saw in that expression caused her to take an unintentional step backward. Mom presented the facts calmly, dispassionately. The timing was unequivocal. I had been at the kitchen table when Hannah claimed I attacked her. We had the testimony of the Collins family who had sheltered me. Irrefutable photographs documented the violence Dad had inflicted. And the medical evaluation Mrs. Collins had insisted on that morning confirmed minor frostbite on my fingers and toes, exposure-related injuries that could have been fatal. Blocks in that storm, she explained, had been a potentially deadly distance. Dad tried to interject, to explain he had been protecting Hannah. He had believed his daughter. He had responded in the moment. But even he recognized his justifications were hollow. I could tell. His face turned bleak as Mom calmly detailed the snowy conditions, the extremely low temperatures, and the very real probability that I might not have lived. Then Mom turned to Hannah. Tell the truth now. My sister's face went through the usual rapid-fire sequence. Defiance, followed by calculation, then pure, unadulterated dread. She was adept at lying, but not good enough to fool her mother, especially when Mom was staring at her with that cold, clinical expression. The stillness grew oppressive and stifling until Hannah's shoulders fell in surrender. The confession came unwillingly, followed by terrible tranquility. She had wanted to go to the mall. She'd been upset at being told no. She had decided to create a diversion. Yes, she had ripped her own clothing. Yes, she had purposefully smudged her makeup. Yes, she fabricated the entire narrative about me attacking her. Her voice was tiny, almost inaudible when she confessed. Nothing compared to the assured performance from the night before. Dad's face was ashen. He stared at Hannah as if he was seeing her for the first time. Then at me, then back at Mom. The awful realization of what he had done finally set in. He had thrashed and expelled his innocent daughter based on a deliberate falsehood. He almost murdered me because he was too ready to trust a theatrical play. His hands started shaking uncontrollably. Mom's reaction was meticulous, precise, and completely crushing. That morning, she had already made phone calls from the Collins residence. Things had already been put in motion and could not be halted. Dad would be moving out immediately, she informed him. Not eventually. Not after they discussed it. Now, she had just called a divorce attorney. Papers were being prepared to be filed Monday morning. The home would be sold. She had already met with a real estate agent and arranged for an evaluation. Everything but custody would be divided equally. She would have complete custody of me and no visitation with him until I decided I wanted contact. Not if I decided, she said, but when I decided on my terms on my timeline. Until then, he has no parental rights, in my opinion. Dad tried to argue, explaining it was a mistake, that he deserved another chance to put things right. Mom's expression remained unchanging, like a granite wall. One mistake, she acknowledged, but a mistake that nearly killed your daughter. A mistake that showed such catastrophically poor judgment that I can no longer trust you with any authority over our family. You had one job as a father, keep your children safe. You failed spectacularly. To Hannah, Mom's response was cold and exact. My sister would complete the school year. Then she would move in with our father, wherever he landed up. She'd made her decision when she lied. Mom said she had decided to exploit Dad's trust, sacrificing her sister for something as insignificant as a trip to the mall. These were not the acts of someone who cherished family, so she could accept the consequences. Hannah protested immediately and loudly. She wailed, "I made a mistake. I didn't intend for things to get this far. I hadn't expected Dad to react so angrily." Mom's expression remained unwavering as the justifications flowed forth. Hannah had seen me freeze on the porch, had grinned as I hammered on the door. That was not an error. It was harsh, and there would be repercussions. After experiencing abuse, it is vital to create solid legal and emotional boundaries to regain agency and ensure safety. Legal boundaries like custody arrangements are critical for safeguarding victims, whereas emotional boundaries establish what behaviors are acceptable in future contacts, often necessitating the dissolution of poisonous links. Dad packed 2 suitcases under Mom's careful supervision. She followed him around the house, making certain he only removed his own possessions, nothing that might be challenged later. He attempted numerous times to apologize to me, his voice cracking, but the words seemed empty and hollow. Sorry did not stop the hitting. Sorry did not erase the trek through the storm, the horror of freezing, or the awful betrayal of being tossed out by the person who was meant to protect me. He departed before midday. Mom stood by the door, her stance tight as she watched him drive away, disappearing around the corner. Then she turned to Hannah, who had been loitering in the corridor, still unsure whether she could talk her way out of trouble. Mom's reaction spoke volumes. No amount of tears would suffice this time. The next several weeks were a flurry of legal processes. Mom handled it all with the same calm efficiency she used in medical situations, checking off items on a mental checklist, filing divorce papers, obtaining a restraining order, listing the house, scheduling therapy sessions. Everything was documented, photographed, and recorded. She created such a strong case that Dad's lawyer urged him not to challenge anything. School got complicated. Word had spread about what had transpired. Maybe Sophie told someone. Perhaps the truth just slips out, as it usually does in small towns. Everyone looked at me differently. Teachers were overly kind. My classmates either ignored me or tried too hard to be pleasant. Hannah had even worse treatment. People had heard she lied, and that her lying almost killed me. Her friends withdrew, unable to trust someone capable of such treachery. Hannah tried to reach out to them sometimes, but her attempts were uncomfortable and plainly motivated by desperation rather than real regret. She missed her friends and the life she had previously. Her deceit had ruined everything. Mom watched these attempts with the same clinical detachment, never interfering or softening. There will be consequences, she had warned Hannah. Actions have them. Dad leased an apartment across town, somewhere modest and gloomy that represented his much-reduced circumstances. The divorce settlement awarded him precisely half of the assets, but half wasn't much after accounting for legal bills and the cost of starting a new life. His new position paid less, partially because news had spread about his unexpected availability. Nobody appeared to want to hire the dad who almost murdered his child. He wrote letters that I didn't read and left voicemails that I didn't listen to. Mom preserved everything, methodically documenting his attempts to communicate for legal grounds. The divorce process exposed truths about my parents' marriage that I had never known. Mom had been unhappy for years, but she stayed for practical reasons: stability for us children, financial security, and the normal considerations when contemplating splitting up a family. Dad's violence had provided her all the rationale she needed, unequivocal proof that remaining was more perilous than leaving. Dad's counsel attempted to portray him as a worried father who overreacted in a state of stress. The tactic failed when Mom's counsel submitted images, medical records, and meteorological data from that night, demonstrating how dangerous the conditions had been. The judge's grave, uncompromising demeanor as she evaluated the evidence spoke volumes. No amount of legal trickery could justify putting a child out into a blizzard. The custody hearing was truly unpleasant. Dad's lawyer called me to the stand and attempted to convince me to declare I wanted a connection with my father, that I missed him, that I knew he made a mistake. I spoke directly to Dad, studying his expression as I recalled the trip through the storm in graphic, frightening detail, the numbness creeping through my limbs, the profound confusion, and the true, bone-deep worry that I might die. After 20 minutes, his lawyer stopped questioning me. Hannah also testified, despite her own counsel telling her not to. She attempted to justify her deception as an impulsive act of a teenager, which she quickly regretted. However, the prosecution obtained footage from our doorbell camera. I had no idea this footage existed. It showed Hannah watching me stomp on the porch with a faint, unsettling grin before turning away. The film was devastating, difficult to dismiss as typical adolescent folly. She had taken pleasure in my agony. Mom's testimony was clinical and sad. She went over the timeline, pointing out flaws in Hannah's statement that Dad should have seen, had he bothered to ask questions. She offered proof of Hannah's habit of manipulation, including minor falsehoods throughout the years and situations in which my sister had twisted facts to get her way. This had not been a unique instance. There had been an escalation. The judge granted Mom full custody with wording that made Dad's prospects of obtaining visits nearly impossible. The decision cited his catastrophic failure of judgment, willingness to use violence without evidence, and reckless endangerment of a minor child. "You nearly murdered your child," the judge stated, her voice resonating, "and this court will not give you another chance to do so." During the divorce proceedings, financial discovery showed that Dad had been concealing money, not in large quantities, but enough to present a clear image of dishonesty. He had a separate bank account and made some investments that he never acknowledged. Mom's lawyer seized on these revelations, painting a picture of a man who had been duplicitous even before the Hannah incident. The judge altered the settlement appropriately, awarding Mom 65% of the marital assets, rather than the standard 50-50 share. Dad's parents attempted to intercede. They contacted Mom, recommended family therapy, and argued that breaking up the family was too drastic. Mom visited with them once, brought images and medical reports, and explained exactly what their son had done to me. They exited that meeting in startled silence, their arguments abandoned in the face of overwhelming facts. They didn't contact us again. We relocated, moving to a smaller home on the opposite side of town. 3 bedrooms instead of 4, a basic kitchen, but it was ours. Mine and Mom's place, free of treachery or violence. Mom let me choose paint colors for my room, helped me organize furniture, and ensured I had everything I needed. She was kinder with me than she had been previously, more cautious, as if I were something valuable that had almost been lost. Hannah moved in with Dad in June, just after school concluded. The situation was just as Mom had promised. Finished the school year in familiar surroundings, then moved to Dad's little apartment. My sister's complaints had diminished by then, replaced by a morose resignation. She understood Mom meant every word, and no amount of tears or trickery could modify the outcome. The apartment complex where Dad and Hannah wound up was in a rougher section of town, with police sirens blaring every night and a parking lot full of cars with expired registrations. Dad's lower income resulted in less favorable circumstances. Hannah disliked it. She'd grown up in a comfortable home in a decent area, with friends who had pools and finished basements. Now she shared a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and neighbors who argued so loudly that every word could be heard. Her new school was also harsher, full of children who didn't care about her prior social standing. She was no one there, just another new chick with an attitude issue. I learned about their problems through the grapevine, mutual friends, individuals who knew both families. Dad was drinking more, arriving at work late, barely holding his life together. Hannah was failing classes, getting into fights, and plummeting in ways that indicated she'd finally recognized how much she'd damaged. Hearing about their deterioration made me feel a sense of dismal satisfaction. A greater chunk simply felt empty. School had changed for me too, albeit in different ways. Teachers who knew me previously regarded me with caution, as if I might shatter if they pushed too hard. Guidance counselors continued arranging check-ins, asking how I was adapting and if I needed someone to talk to. The attention was oppressive, even though I knew it was motivated by concern. My grades improved when everything else fell apart. With the pandemonium at home gone, I could concentrate on my studies without waiting for the next explosion. Mom created a place that was peaceful and neat, allowing me to focus. Math made sense in ways it didn't before. When I wasn't on edge, I could write English essays with ease. Sophie remained my best friend throughout everything. Her parents testified at the custody court. Their story of my arrival that night had substantial weight. Mr. Collins stated my condition in harsh medical terms. Early stages of hypothermia, frostbite on exposed limbs, and obvious evidence of shock or trauma. His evidence made Dad's lawyer obviously uneasy. The Collins family never treated me differently, nor did they make me feel like a charity case or a victim. Sophie's house became a second home, a place where normal life could continue. Movie nights, study sessions, meals. The most dramatic moment was when someone forgot to set the table. Normalcy provided healing in ways that therapy didn't. Mom returned to work with fresh zeal, working extra shifts, volunteering, enrolling in training programs she had previously turned down. I realized she was processing everything via action, burning off her fury and terror by remaining continually active. On her days off, Mom was completely there, making lavish dinners, assisting with homework, taking me shopping for necessities. The contrast was dramatic, yet sustained. Her friends gathered behind us over those months, women from the hospital, neighbors from our previous block, folks I had known my entire life. They donated casseroles, provided babysitting, and overall formed a support network to replace some of the void left by losing half of our family. Mom gently accepted their compassion, which might be overpowering at times. Dad attempted to build a relationship through letters, lengthy, meandering pages about regret and personal growth, pledges to improve, and explanations for why he had responded so badly. Mom reviewed each one first, looking for anything wrong before deciding whether to give them to me. The majority went right into a file folder she retained for legal purposes. The few she offered me were hollow, like meaningless words on paper, unable to restore what had been done. I tried reading one once and got 3 paragraphs in before my fury flared up so much that I had to put it down. He wrote about understanding my point of view, about the treatment he'd started, and about trying to regain my trust. Everything sounded like scripts from a self-help book. Empty statements that proved he knew intellectually what he'd done wrong, but didn't feel the crushing weight. I had sleeplessness throughout my first year. I'd lie awake until 2 or 3 in the morning, my mind racing with innumerable what-if possibilities. What if I didn't make it to Sophie's house? What if the Collins family hadn't been there? The what-ifs were unending and tiresome. Mom ultimately sent me to a sleep doctor who provided medicine that helped, but the dreams continued to occur sometimes. High school started rather tough. Freshman year brought a building full of classmates who had heard variants of my story. The majority of them had become corrupted as a result of repeated recounting. Some kids regarded me like a morbid celebrity, asking for details about the snow and the beating. Others avoided me completely, uneasy with the living reminder that parents can be deadly. I learned to balance both extremes by keeping my head down and focusing on my studies. Sophie and I ended up in different friend groups that year, which is a natural progression as people acquired distinct interests. She remained polite and continued to invite me to events, but we were not as close as we had been previously. The common suffering had briefly linked us, but true friendship required more than that. We stayed friendly until graduation, then lost touch as college drove us in various directions. Mom began dating when I was 15, taking great care to ensure that I was at ease with anyone she introduced me to. Neither of the partnerships lasted long. She'd learned to see red flags and walk away at the first sight of dishonesty or fury. Her standards had risen to unrealistically high levels, which felt fair given what we had been through. One person, James, lasted over 7 months. He was gentle with my suspicions, never pushed too far, and always respected Mom's limits. They'd go out to dinner or the movies while I stayed at home, and he'd leave her with nothing but a kiss goodnight on the porch. I admired his discipline, even if I resented his presence. Mom eventually ended it, recognizing that I was not ready to share her with anybody. Dad's attempts to re-enter my life intensified around my 17th birthday. Letters became phone calls to Mom's number, which he was not supposed to have. Gifts appeared on our porch. Books, jewelry, and other items that showed he had taken an interest in my hobbies. Mom cataloged everything, preserved the receipts and cards, and created a dossier to chronicle his boundary infractions. When he arrived at her residence one evening, she contacted the police. Mom came up with the idea for the restraining order, which she carried out with the same systematic efficiency that she had used in the divorce. Dad had been clearly ordered to keep away, yet he had repeatedly disregarded that directive, demonstrating an inability to respect our limits. The court instantly issued the injunction, expanding it to include both Mom and myself. Dad was apprehended by police the next day when he attempted to approach me outside school. Hannah graduated from high school by the closest margin. I heard she barely finished her senior year and had skipped so many classes that the school threatened to keep her back. In the photographs I saw on social media, she appeared older than her years, more weathered. The girl who had grinned while watching me freeze had transformed into someone I could hardly recognize. She walked out of Dad's apartment the day after graduation, crashed with friends, did minimum wage jobs, and wandered through the following several years without a plan. Social media revealed a string of disastrous relationships and questionable actions, indicating the usual trajectory of someone who never learned to accept responsibility for consequences. I looked from afar, feeling nothing. Dad had a second episode, which confirmed Mom's decision to entirely cut him off. He got into a confrontation at a pub, beat someone so hard that their jaw broke, and was jailed for assault. The specifics were unclear, but witnesses claimed he had been drinking and became hostile when someone ran into him. When alcohol was present, the pattern of aggression that began with me appeared to spread to strangers. His lawyer was able to keep him out of jail, but he was unable to avoid probation, required anger management sessions, and limits on his ability to spend time with his own children. Not that it mattered. I had previously forbidden any communication, and Hannah had gone on to cause her own calamities. Dad had successfully alienated everyone who had ever cared for him. Over the next few months, I saw them on occasion, usually in stores or on the street. Dad always seemed shrunken, smaller than I recalled. Hannah was upset, her face a permanent frown, implying that life with Dad was not matching her expectations. I felt nothing when staring at them. There was no wrath or pleasure, only a tremendous void where family once was. Therapy helped. Dr. Morrison specialized in trauma and understood how to help me comprehend what had happened without pushing too hard. She stated that betrayal by family members left distinct types of wounds, that recovery was not linear, and that some days were more difficult than others. She was correct. Some mornings I awoke enraged, ready to shout about the injustice of it all. Other days, I simply felt exhausted, weighed down by the sheer weight of everything that had happened. Mom never questioned her decisions. She had burned down our family, spread the ashes, and rebuilt something new from the rubble. Just the two of us, figuring out how to be a family with half of the members missing. She worked her shifts at the hospital, came home to prepare dinner, helped with schoolwork, and did all the typical mom things, but with a newfound, passionate protectiveness. High school came and went. I obtained high grades, went to college, and constructed a life apart from the family I'd lost. Hannah reached out a few times over the years, sending emails implying a desire to reconcile and restore what she had lost. I never replied. Some things are permanently broken. Dr. Morrison said that was okay. Dad died when I was 26. A heart attack, abrupt and deadly. I attended the funeral because Mom claimed it would provide closure, even though I wasn't sure I needed it. Hannah was there, older, but with the same calculating attitude she had at 17. She tried to talk to me about using Dad's death as a bridge to reconnect. I walked away in the middle of her sentence. I didn't owe anyone forgiveness, simply because we shared DNA.